we can get this meeting of the Joint Review Board started. First item is Pledge of Allegiance, so please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Then we want to review the annual PD 300 reports and the performance and status of the village's active tax incremental district as required by Wisconsin Statute 66.1105 Part 4 MF. And I believe Todd,
You can take it from here if you like.
all right.
So we're here to fulfill the statutory requirements of this body to meet once a year, and the technical requirement is that you be provided a copy of the PE 300 form, which is pretty much useless because it's just a one-year snapshot of the revenues and expenditures. But obviously, we're all most interested in what does the future look like. So what we're going to talk about is the forward-looking forecast. There's a little bit of narrative in there. I'll just skip past that because we'll talk about it. But then we've got two different maps within the report. The first one identifies with the darker boundary the physical geography of tax increment district number 3. So this incorporates sites within the original Fredonia Business Park that had not yet developed. And then includes the territory to the east that represents the land that the village acquired after forming the TID for the business park expansion. And the color-coded map on the second page simply represents the sites that are developed or have been acquired with a commitment to build. Those would be the pink or the red shading versus the sites that remain available, which would be the green sites. So I'm going to turn then to the page that says development assumptions as we get into the spreadsheet. So if we kind of go from left to right, the actual column, just like it sounds, represents the actual valuation of the district. So in this case, it's through the 23.
Looks like we have our guest here. Hello, Sherry. Can you hear us? Looks like you're muted on your end.
Hello.
There we go.
Good afternoon. So
Sorry, go ahead.
So Sherry, we were just starting to go through the report. You should have received that electronically. I had mentioned there were a couple maps in the packet. The distinction between the two is the first one simply shows the territory that is within the TID, and then the second color-coded map, the red shaded lots are those that have been either developed or where there's been an acquisition and a commitment to build or building ongoing versus the green, which remain the available sites within the business park. So we were just getting then into the page that talks about the development assumptions and the actual column.
Okay.
So as of the 1st of January of this year, the certified incremental value of the district was 7.9 million. I know for those that were present at last year's meeting, we talked a little bit about this, and it looks kind of funny when you look at the column. But just as a recap, what had occurred here, and one interesting thing I think we learned is that when a state assessed manufacturing property does an expansion, they have a self-reporting requirement, which I thought was a little unusual. But in this case, Guy and O'Neill did not report in a timely fashion. So what the Department of Revenue does is they use a process whereby they make corrections. So long story short, we really should have had more value in that 2021 construction year. So what the department does is they artificially overstate the value in the following year, in this case, 2022. So what that represents is adding the value as it should have been in the first place, and then adding it a second time to allow the TID to recover the tax increment that it basically should have collected in the prior year. And then that additional amount, that corrected amount, they back that out in the second year. So that's why for 2023, we see a 9.5 million year over year loss of value. That's not a real loss of value. It's a removal on paper of that correction amount. So as it stands right now, that 7.9 million, all the corrections have washed out, and that represents the real value of the physical improvements on within the TID territory as of the first of this year. So prospectively, and we've divided this into areas within the existing or the old business park versus the area that was acquired by the village, referred to as a business park expansion. And what we've indicated here, where there is a company identified, this represents an acquisition or a commitment to build, along with a projection, or in some cases, a minimum agreed to assess value and the year in which that value needs to be constructed and then come online for the following January 1st. We also have nearer to the right under the column called remaining developable acres, and I've got a call out box. This is basically a plug number, and we'll see the relevance of that when we look at the cash flow in a moment. But there's going to need to be a certain amount of value created within the TID in order to allow the TID to recover all of the costs that have been incurred by its final maximum year in 2042 budget year. And so that 5 million is really just that bogey. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is after we sent this report out, Chris had notified me that there's a pending land sale transaction and another commitment to build. That was Paulson, right?
That was Gazarovski.
Gazarovski.
Yep.
So that's not reflected in here, but that's going to change that $5 million plug number to about 4.3 million. So in other words, within the areas that were identified on that map as not yet committed to, we're going to need to see roughly 4.3 million in value. Now, again, these are minimum values. These are projections. As the actual values come in each year, we'll continue to update this and monitor it. But what this identifies is we do need some additional development to happen on those remaining lots, which is anticipated. Absolutely.
So I remember the amount of value that the Brian O'Neill edition was 5.5 million. So where this minus, I think you said 7 million over here. How is that figured in?
I would have to go back and look at all those numbers. I wouldn't.
Have some of those numbers.
Michelle's having flashbacks.
No, like induced flashbacks. All right, let's take a look.
And I have two is like, the ideal tree service for 150 and Paulson Mechanical for 600. Those seem low. I mean, is that just a number that we put in there, or were these numbers that we got from them saying that by this time it would be that much value, or what do you
Yeah, so
think?
it's numbers from them that they said that's gonna be their minimum value that they're gonna be
That's
accruing.
2020.
And so I agree that like ideal tree service, when they drop a steel building, for sure, it's gonna be worth more than 150. And so we're at least, budgeting as conservative as we can to give ourselves the best shot from a budget perspective.
But I guess from
Oh,
a
the
buyer's point of
2023.
view, it's kind of like, some of these numbers are somewhere through.
Yeah.
So
Little
if they were a little bit more accurate, then it would look better.
And that's why Todd was saying that as they get built, right, we'll update those with those accurate assessments.
I think with all the groundbreaking that we could have this year, I think next year's meeting will have a
I hope so.
clearer
For sure.
picture.
Yeah,
The-
I hope that a lot of breaking ground in spring or summer of
Yeah,
2025.
at least 3 of them. Gazarovski on one of his 2 lots, if not both. Mirror Image, the dance studio, I forgot about them, and Greatland Electric, which is over along Milwaukee. All of them plan on constructing next year.
Do we have any new perspective building going in where it's gonna put in a larger dollar amount? Cause these seem, you know, small buildings, small dollars, are we gonna be able to recoup our stuff in order to, you know, fulfill our obligations?
Well,
Remember Guy and O'Neill was gonna put in this gigantic building and I don't see anything on here with them. And I'm like, oh,
Was that Venture Paperboard?
no, it was Guy and O'Neill. They were
Yeah.
gonna, behind the building that they just built, they wanted to put on another huge building and we saved room for them.
Yeah.
And it, I mean, that would help the kids
For
so
sure.
much. And it's like, well.
Yeah, so in talking to them, they still have future plans to build, but they can't hold to any timeline. And so we told them this, 15 remaining acres that's here, if they're the first ones to it, right, they certainly can have it to expand. But until that time comes, they're not prepared to lock into a set date to build by. So if another developer comes in, swoops in to take that, then we're happy to do so.
and that correction amount was 7.3 million.
I'm just remembering all the paperwork I got from the Department of Revenue on the omitted part. Was 5.5.
Is that the assessed value?
Well, that might have been the omitted initially or whatever, but then I
From
feel like that
2023.
the error or whatever, I feel like was like 7 million or that's.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
that
error,
too.
the error,
Yeah,
stuff-
that
the
too.
error was, or the correction.
Yeah, I remember
Was
that
7.3.
too. Okay,
I mean,
we're talking different things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the other thing too, that I didn't mention is we obviously lost the PP. As of the first of this
Mhm.
year, so that makes up part of that reduction as well. The
Okay.
bulk of it's the correction coming off, but we also lost that personal property, but we're getting the aid payment, which we have on the flats there, that offsets that. So I think just to recap, the simplistic way to look at it, to answer your question is, when we look at what's already there and what we've projected, again, noting, some of it is very likely conservative. We ultimately need like 25 million and that will recover the project cost. If it happens sooner, that number goes down. If it takes longer to build, that number will go up.
Yeah.
Just because obviously more value sooner is better and will generate more cash flow over the term. The next exhibit is just simply taking that valuation stream on the far left. So that just carries over from the prior exhibit and then forecasting out what the tax increment collections would be over the maximum life of the TID. So the numbers for 23 and 24 revenue years above the dash line, those are the actual increment collections. We've held the tax rate constant. And what has been happening is we've seen the tax rate going down, and that's primarily because we've seen property values going up on a fair market value. So we've neither assumed any change in value nor in tax rate. So if we were to assume a drop in the tax rate, we would assume then an increase in the value of the TID. So if you're wondering why we're assuming the tax rate is flat, it's just to keep it simple. And obviously this is a variable item as well, so that will get updated each year, but 6.2 million ultimately is again about what we need to collect over the 20-year term to pay off. So the last page where it all comes together is the cash flow. And on the revenue side, on the left, we've got, again, that projected 6.2, 6.3 million in tax increments coming in. We have the personal property aid. I just referenced that. So all personal property within the state of Wisconsin is now exempt as of the first of the year. And part of the act that did that exemption also provided an aid program for municipalities. It's a dollar for dollar offset. So that 35,000 and change you see coming in starting in 2025, that's the actual amount of the aid payment that DOR has published, and the village will collect that for the tax increment district for each year that the TID remains open. The rest of the items are some of the debt coming in. But the other one I would mention is the land sale revenue. And again, we've got a little more land sale revenue coming in 24 pending that closing. And there's also, again, obviously land that remains available, and we've not factored that in either. So really when I'm calculating that plug number to break even, it's probably a little bit less than that because we'll also have some land sale revenue coming in on that side of the ledger. We don't know when that is or what the amount is. But that will, contribute to the cash flow as well. In terms of the liabilities, we have a trust fund loan that was taken out in 2021. It's shown as if it were two separate loans because it was taken down in two draws. This loan, the proceeds finance the acquisition of the land and then some of the initial infrastructure installation from the existing park to the east property line. And then earlier this year, the village issued a GO bond with a 20-year term, which is funding all the infrastructure work that you see going on out there right now. At the present time, there is, and correct me if I misspeak here, Chris, there's no intention of any additional project costs at this point other than the village's cost to keep the TID open as far as the administration.
No, and in fact, I was gonna share that we look to be under budget by about 600K. So Todd, you and I can chat about maybe what's the best use of those funds, to prolong this pain that we might see in the future here.
So the result of that would do is if we look at that cumulative fund balance column, I'm assuming that you're spending all the money that's borrowed.
Yep.
And so that, for example, that 643,000 year-end number in 24, that number would go up.
Okay.
So I put in a plug that allows us to recover all project costs by the very final year. So I'm showing about a $6,000 balance in the year of closure. We do run a interim deficit in the years 2028 through 2041. So again, if we've got more cash on hand, we're not going to start to experience that cumulative deficit probably for a few more years. And again, we may see more development occur in the interim period. But the village has a few years yet before we have any concerns about actually having cash to pay the bills. And again, we'll see where we're at that point. Ultimately, the debt is a general obligation of the village, so the village does have the ability to levy that if needed. But again, I think the current thought here is that available land will likely sell in due course and be developed. And ideally, we will have the increment coming in to pay the debt service and hopefully down the road even close the TID earlier than the 20-year maximum. So this is where we sit as of today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
What are we expecting for costs for what they're doing right now with the infrastructure, the road and the I don't know what kind of pipe that is that's laying.
That's where you're saying.
All that's
Under-
sewer and water and
Right, but I mean, what are we expecting that to cost?
Yeah, so it's about 2.6 million was the initial contract. And then I'm thinking about the change orders that we've added now. Yeah, so we've added about 400K of change orders, one of which included the Tower Drive and Industrial Drive paving, which was part of the original TID scope. And when we did the bonding, we didn't know if we were going to have all the money just to do the grading alone. And so the fact that we had the additional dollars, we were able to add that in and still have 600K left. So
we planned 3.5, but so
Yeah.
2.9 is closer to where we're
Yeah.
at now.
that's fair.
excuse me, Todd, you had said that if nothing happens, we're 6.5 million short at the end of it, if nothing would occur with any of these lots. Is the remaining lots and what they would build worth 6.5 million?
Are you referring to this number?
Yeah,
So the 5 million or now we're at about 4.3. When we look at the acreage, idea to subdivide this potentially if necessary.
If we needed to, but ideally, I mean,
Yeah.
like Sandy said, another guy in O'Neill. I mean,
Or
very
advocate for it. I mean, one large user on here would be, I think, the ideal.
I hope so, yeah.
I mean, you would need about 100,000 square foot roughly. Not even that. So say I usually figure about $75 a square foot for industrial, which is can be on the low end. So if our gap is at this point like 4.3 million, we'd need less than 50,000 square feet. So I think from a geography standpoint, there's plenty of room to accommodate that much. I think the
Okay.
thing is to find the company that is
Like
looking at a
that,
facility of that size.
The numbers of projected values of the buildings that they're putting up, they put that number on there. Who assesses that? I mean, does a tax assessor reevaluate those properties so that we're not just sticking to these?
So the
Or what?
state assesses manufacturing. That's part of your question.
Mm.
I don't know if you want to expand.
Yeah, so actual manufacturing properties are assessed by the state. Other than Guy and O'Neill, I don't know that any of these are gonna be state.
So since Badger Paperboard is expanding, or are they building across the road, so that's considered new, or?
Yeah, so they'd be expanding into their vacant lot here. Yep. That's true.
Well, yeah, so do they need to self-report like Guy and O'Neill did?
I
Because
would
they're
imagine,
Kind of,
I would imagine they would.
because they're already existing here or whatever as part of that. That was gonna be one of my questions of
Mhm.
7.5 million, that's the biggest valuation.
Yep.
It still is.
Right, and they're not.
They still aren't
doing anything
right.
until 28, 7 or
Right, but
28.
what is their contract for that or whatever that?
So
we
they're the
feel
only
highly
one-
likely or whatever for that? or
So yes and no. So they're the only ones that don't have a signed developers agreement because they only own the property.
whatever?
So we didn't have any leverage to corner them and say, hey, you have to develop by this time. But we have met with the owners. Their plan is to expand. But as far as, nailing them down to a timeline, I mean, they're ready to expand when their business warrants them to expand. So I mean, it's positive. They've never told us no. They still want to expand. There's a reason they have that property. We offered to buy it back from them if they had no interest for it, and they do have interest. So, but you're right. That's one of those that we're crossing our fingers, and we'll continue to work with them and send them connections with the Washington County, or sorry, the Ozaki County Economic Development, and we, continue to push them in the right direction.
So if they don't do anything in 27, 28, just because of the economy or whatever,
Mhm.
that's a big change.
Yep,
isn't it?
somebody's gotta fill that in.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
Yeah, and to just respond to the question, so if it's. Most of these are probably not going to be state assessed manufacturing properties, so they will be assessed by the village assessor. And the village assessor has to follow the Wisconsin Property Assessment Manual. So any sort of an agreement is not relevant to that. They have to assess it based on. Either income approach, comparable sale approach, or construction cost. I would imagine in most cases, these will be based on construction cost or possibly comparable facility.
Right, and I'm glad Sandy brought that up, because some of the numbers just don't make.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, they would not meet that. We have language in each of the developers agreements that would allow us to shore up and then collect that difference of tax revenues that we're missing out on.
How,
What's that?
how?
I can look at one of our agreements, but. Guess, do you have anything on your, just grab the most recent one?
Well, at the end of it, if the TID is short or whatever, if development wouldn't happen or whatever, right? So it's still underwater or whatever. It's not that it comes back to the county or the tech college or the school or anything. It's really then ownership of the village or whatever, and the village would then have to put additional levy on the residents of the
Something
village
that
or
we
whatever
used
to
to
then cover the
very-
debts or whatever. this is,
Are all the
right?
Correct.
Kind of big numbers, if stuff don't happen, it's.
So the first section says if minimum property value is not achieved by such date, the difference in tax increment generated shall be specially assessed on the property for the life of the TID until the minimum valuation is achieved. That's one option we have. And then there's also a clause about failure to develop property, in which case we can buy it back for half the cost. of that.
So we don't have any money.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
So this is strictly informational. We do have a resolution. All the resolution says is we got together and we met and you received the PE 300 so that the village has a piece of paper for its auditor or for the file that shows that we met the statutory requirements.
And that's already been filed, it's not waiting on this meeting or whatever.
No,
It's part of that.
Yeah,
packet,
the PE 300 form actually is due by July 1st. Each year, we traditionally wait to do this meeting because, you know, the values come out on August 15. So it makes sense to have best information.
Estimates.
Exactly, right,
Yes,
yeah.
okay. Got it.
So we need a motion to approve the resolution, which is in this packet.
So moved.
Got a motion, got a second?
I'll second it.
You got a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote. We'll start with our guest online.
Aye.
Sure. Judge?
Aye.
Bruce?
Aye.
Sandy?
I,
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Mm-hmm.
Given that, we are in order to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
second.
Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And we are adjourned. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.
Thank you
you.
for joining.
Thanks,
Thank
Sherry,
you
for
all.
joining us.
You have that statement of equalized value again for the village.